when you look at Moondreamers, for example, and that entire world and the play sets and the galaxy and the good guys and the bad guys and the role play and the things that you do, you don't see that so much. I mean, granted, we have Rainbow High, we have dolls, fashion dolls that have got, a lot of character development, but I think there's something missing, and I can't really put my finger on it to say it's worse or it's not as good. I think it's great, but I think there's something missing that was there in those toys of the 80s.
If you're watching on YouTube, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment about the episode. And if you're watching on Spotify or listening on a traditional podcast platform, please follow, rate us 5 stars, and leave a review if you would be so kind. Thank you. Welcome to the Wait I Know You podcast, season 2, episode 13. My name is Nick Rounds, and I will be your host. My next guest is a legendary toy designer and illustrator that has been creating products for over 40 years. Rainbow Brite, Popples, Gem and the Holograms, Dolly Surprise, Love of My Baby, Polly Pocket, and the iconic WWF Wrestling Buddies. There's a chance you've owned a toy that my guest helped create. After staying humble and secretive about her work for a long time, she decided to write a book titled Toy Stories, The Secret Life of a Toy Designer, that shows and tells all about her amazing work. The book chronicles many of her toy projects and features gorgeous illustrations and prototypes for toys that have shipped and toys that have never seen the light of day until now. Stefanie Eskander, wait, I know you. How are you today?
Hey, Nick. Very nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me today. There's a lot to talk about. You have an amazing career, and I think one of the things you're most well known for is your Wrestling Buddies, of course, but you have talked about that extensively. But I just want to touch on a couple anecdotes. First and foremost, you have that little Legion of Doom guy behind you. And it's completely insane.
He's actually one of my hand-done prototypes.
Yeah, that's one of the things that like blew me away is that to hear that when you were working on those for the first time that you were hand coloring those with markers like in a hotel room like on a tight deadline, which is just absolutely insane to me.
Yeah, that was of course, not only was it in a hotel room, all night long, all weekend long, but it was also in Minneapolis, so it was probably minus 20 degrees outside. And I was away from my family, and so I just spent my evenings trying to get these buddies ready for Toy Fair. We had 6 weeks from the time I did my first design until the toys were introduced at Toy Fair in February 1990.
Yeah, they're so iconic. And I aged out of wrestling toys in general, but I remember some of my little cousins had the Wrestling Buddies, and I thought that's just such a smart idea of mixing a type of play, like a roughhouse play that's, parents are okay with, of beating up a pillow basically, but still satisfying the condition of like, I want to wrestle with like some of the WWF superstars. So it was such an awesome idea and mashup. So in doing my research about you, and listening to a bunch of the podcasts that you've done already, because I didn't necessarily want to step on the toes of some of the other people that have asked you amazing questions. You shared a story about when you worked for Tonka, you were part of the same toy family as Kenner, who were famous for many toy lines, including the real Ghostbusters, a toy line that I absolutely loved. And in another interview, you mentioned that airport security confiscated one of your Ghostbuster guns that you were bringing home for your kids. And in listening to that, you actually jogged a memory for me because I tried to bring my Ghost Zapper gun through airport security. And like, I remember vividly like them taking it from me and like scanning it through the x-ray machine and everything. And can you tell me what that experience was like for you when that happened?
It's kind of a funny story. This was in December of 1989. And actually, I hadn't actually started work yet. I started a couple of days after Christmas in 1989. So, but I had gone out to Minneapolis with my husband on a house hunting trip. And so Tonka had a toy store. A lot of toy companies have a toy store. And so we went, to the toy store while we were there for our visit, my husband and I, and we wanted to pick up some stuff for our kids who were our youngest of 3 at the time. We ended up having another child later, but Alec was about 3 years old, 3 or 4 years old at the time. And so we picked up this Ghostbuster gun for him for Christmas, to give to him for Christmas in just a few days. And so we were, as I recall, we were late to the plane. And so we're rushing, and of course, this is before 9/11. So airport security was a lot different than it became later. You didn't have to, I don't remember going through the folderol that you did later, but we get ready to walk onto the plane, and they said, well, you've got a gun. No, we don't have a gun. And so we pull out this brightly colored, Ghostbusters gun, and they confiscated. Eventually, from what I recall, they shipped it to us. They didn't even let us, because we were running late. We didn't have time to wait for them to go through this process that you went through, the, x-raying and looking at it. And we were late to our plane, and I was heartbroken because I was afraid that, we weren't going to be able to give it to our son for Christmas, which, as it turned out, we weren't. They shipped it to us and it arrived after Christmas, but we did buy him some Ghostbusters figures and some other things. So he didn't know any different. It was okay. But it was a funny story.
Yeah. Pre 9/11 airport security was wild. Yeah. Good times. So I jumped ahead a little bit in talking about your working at Tonka, but I actually want to go back to some of your early days before becoming a toy designer officially. You're an illustrator, and you have not written a book about all the amazing work that you've done as an illustrator.
Should I?
But some of that work, I mean, show me what you got. I think you should, honestly. I think your work is fantastic, and I think your illustrations are fantastic. So I'm biased, so I would say yes. But some of that work in doing my research includes creating marketing art for Taco Bell and Denny's kids menus, right?
Yeah, I will tell you some funny stories, or at least a funny story about the whole Denny's thing. But let me go back and just tell you a little bit about my background, because I didn't know anything at all about the toy industry. I did not go to school to be a toy designer. I didn't have any idea that I would end up being a toy designer. What I did want to be was a children's illustrator. And so I got my degree in the mid 70s in illustration, but with an emphasis on children's illustration. Of course, back in the 70s, in the university that I went to, they had a very small illustration department, and it wasn't really like you could pick an area of illustration. So I just did a lot of kids art. I started illustrating for a children's magazine while I was still in college. Got my feet wet doing that. My goal, starting from the time I was a little girl, was I wanted to be a children's book illustrator. And I was greatly influenced by a lot of the children's books of the 50s and early 60s when I was a child. So that's what I wanted to do. And but of course, being the practical person that I was, and that being, when you're an illustrator, you have to be practical. I began my career as an advertising illustrator, although I did a lot of children's type work. So I started in Los Angeles in the mid 70s. After I graduated from college, I started working for a very large advertising agency, Gray Advertising. I was a staff illustrator. I was a primarily storyboard illustrator. I've got some little sample. This is just a sample thing. These were all done in the 70s of the kind of work that I did. And if you see, we have a taco girl eating taco here, and we have another girl down here eating tacos. I did a lot of work for Taco Bell, and I do have some samples that I can share with you of some of my Taco Bell art. But the advertising agency that I worked for we had Taco Bell was one of our major clients, also Bank of America, Princess Cruises, Western Savings, Vaughn's Grocery Stores, which is a chain of stores still existing in California.
Southern California.
Yeah. And so I did, I did a lot of television, storyboard work, and what we call comps, and finished illustration, and really enjoyed my association with my advertising colleagues. But what ended up happening was I got married, and then I had a child. And when I decided that I was going to leave full-time agency work and freelance, because that just kind of made the most sense. So we were living in Los Angeles, and for the next 5 or 6 years, I started to freelance for some of the large advertising agencies in the LA area, which led me kind of into toys from the back door, because I started freelancing for Mattel's ad agency, doing storyboards for Barbie, Masters of the Universe, See and Say, Mon Chi-Chi. And I started working or illustrating for Tomy Toys ad agency. So I was doing Get Along Gang and Kimberly dolls, and, just doing some advertising storyboards, just like all my other clients. I didn't look at that and say, oh, I want to get into the toy industry. It was just a really fun opportunity for me to kind of specialize in children's products and draw kids, which is what I really, really love to do. But I thought of myself primarily as an illustrator, and not, I hadn't had any experience designing products. But I could do kids, and I could do character drawings. And so before I got into toys full time, I had mentioned that I started illustrating for a children's magazine in the 70s that was called The Friend. And then just before I went to work at Mattel, I went out to Indianapolis and brought my portfolio. Back in those days, you didn't want to ship your portfolio to a client because it might get lost, something might happen. There was no internet, there was no, way to transport your artwork. So you just traveled around and showed your book to your prospective clients. So I went out to Indianapolis to a company called the Children's Better Health Institute, which was a division of the Curtis Publishing Company, which published the Saturday Evening Post. And they had a lot of children's magazines that they published. Turtle, Humpty Dumpty, Jack and Jill, Children's Playmate, Children's Digest, and they all were age graded. So Turtle was the preschool magazine, and then Humpty Dumpty was a little bit older, and it got up, and by the time you got up to Children's Digest, it was up into elementary school. And so they immediately gave me assignments, and I worked for off and on. I freelanced for those children's magazines for close to 10 years, until the early to mid 90s. I have here's one of the covers that I did for Turtle magazine. This is from 1985.
That's awesome.
Any Turtle magazine had to have turtle on the cover. It wasn't a specific turtle, but had some kind of turtle. I did here's for Humpty Dumpty magazine, here's an illustration I did, a 4-page cute. This is the kind of work that I did. Cute kids. I have stacks of magazines sitting next to me of the illustrations that I did during those next years. And a lot of that was done after I got into the toy industry. I was just, doing those illustrations in the evening after work, and taking care of my kids, and doing everything, because I really love the illustration work. So illustration is really how I got into toys. But I wanted to tell you the Denny's story.
Yes,
so
please.
I believe it was 1983. I'm picking up. I have
Twas a good year.
'Twas a good year. I believe this is 1983. I'm looking at, see if there's a copyright date on this. Anyway, I was contacted by Denny's ad agency, and it wasn't unusual. That's how I worked. I was, the ad agencies would contact me. I generally got work from word of mouth, because I'd worked for such a large agency, and just like a lot of industries, people would leave one agency and go to another. And so I had art directors that I worked with at one agency, and they'd move to another one, and they'd want to work with me again. So anyway, I got this call from Denny's ad agency, and they wanted to know if I would be interested in doing some finished art, not TV storyboard work for their, they were coming up with a campaign of children's products, menus, bibs, and trays that were specially designed for kids. And so there was a tie-in with Kenner with this. And so, for example, I have this darling little, this was the children's menu. So you can see whoops, sorry, I'm always backwards here. You see the Denny's logo, and then you open it up and there's a cute little activity, but you can see at the bottom, there's coupons, strawberry shortcake, power movers. And then on the back was more, cross-selling. They were selling, this is right after strawberry shortcake came out. The offer expires in October of 83. So it's also possible I did this in 82, but it was done in the early 80s. So anyway,
that's so awesome. I love seeing that kind of work.
It consisted of, as I mentioned, the menus and then trays. This is one of the trays that I did. There were 3. I used to have all 3 of them. My daughter has one. One of them actually broke. They're made out of like a melamine plastic. There was one that was a robot, or a little spaceman. And then there was another one that was a panda, a boy panda who was painting the rainbow. And then the little girl swinging from the sun. And the sun up here is actually an indentation for a glass, a cup. And then you can see the round indentation for the plate. So these were given out at Denny, or not given out. They were used for kids. I don't think the kids could keep them or buy them. So the story is, cool. The story is that the client sent me some drawings. They wanted a bear, but the bear that they wanted, I thought was the funniest looking little bear. Well, it was Care Bears. It was the before Care Bears were released, because Kenner produced a lot of the toys that were developed by American Greetings, like Strawberry Shortcake, which were in turn developed by a company called Those Characters from Cleveland, which is American Greetings character development division, where they developed Strawberry Shortcake, and they developed Popples, and a lot of the toys that either were produced by Kenner or produced by their own toy company. And so
it was the same company as My Pet Monster, right?
Yes, and I was just going to mention My Pet Monster was one of the other ones that was done by TCFC. So Those Characters from Cleveland, or TCFC, had, as far as I know, I mean, it's possible that this came from Kenner, but I believe it came from TCFC. Oh, I love it. That was also created by one of my friends, one of my great industry toy friends. He's amazingly talented. Anyway, so back to this story. So they sent me these, it must have been early concept artwork for Care Bears. I had never seen them before. And this is going to hurt the feelings of people who love Care Bears. I thought they were really ugly. They said, well, we'd like you to do these bears. And I thought, I can't do those bears. They're not cute. And so somehow I convinced them that they should just let me do my own bears. And so this little girl, she was my own bear that I did in 1982 or early 80. It must have been about 82 that I did this. But pretty audacious, and I wasn't in the toy industry really yet. And so I didn't nobody said, this is our new licensed character that we're coming out with. They would just said, we'd like you to use these bears. And I said, no. So they went along with it. They let me do my own bear.
And that's ironic considering the fact that you worked on Popples. So shots
Well,
fired.
that's a whole other story about working on Popples, because Popples, I give a lot of kudos to TCFC. They created a lot of wonderful characters, but their early development on Popples was not particularly attractive. And when I was at Mattel. This was my first year first year full time in the toy industry, which was 1985. We received this assignment from those characters from Cleveland to, somewhere along the line, when you're a designer, you're not working with these licensors. You're just a designer, right? So I didn't have any input into whether we were going to accept this new project or whatever. Those things were decided by people much more important than I was. And so we received these drawings from those characters from Cleveland of these little nebbish characters that had big noses, and they did they did fold up, but they didn't look anything like the Popples that we did. Generally, when you work on a licensed property from a licensor like Strawberry Shortcake or Rainbow Brite or something, the character is fully developed by the time the toy company gets it. The toy company's job then is to take those, greeting card illustrations of Strawberry Shortcake and turn it into a product. But with Popples, it did not come in fully developed. And so we took it, and I was in a team. I try to always be really straightforward about my part. I was in a team of maybe 3 or 4 designers at Mattel. I wish I could remember. Unfortunately, I didn't keep very good records my first year. I didn't think to write down the names of who was doing things, but there were probably 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 of us who worked on Popples. And one of the first things we did was redesigned them. And so we sat down and, kind of collaborated. One of the people on the team came up with the idea of having their ears being 2 different colors, which was kind of, people who love Popples just take that for granted, but that was a big deal at the time. And the original characters of Popples were not pretty bright colors. They were kind of browns and greens, and they weren't the colorful characters that we eventually created. They had some of the same characteristics. They had the long tail with the puff at the end, but we thought that their big noses were not cute. One of my jobs was to design the eyes, and I didn't want to have generic toy eyes. Oh, look how cute. Oh, see, I don't know if you can see, but they have very unique eyes, which I designed for each of them. But we came up with characters. We came up with 9 basic characters with different color combinations. We had so much fun. Just, I did the basic drawings. We made Xerox copies, and then we all experimented with colors to come up with the combinations that we liked the best. It was kind of a team effort. I do kind of take credit for some of the way they ended up looking and how their proportions and things, because I was kind of the illustrator in the group. But I don't have any of my original drawings, and I just have vague memories, and I certainly don't want to step on the toes of any of my teammates by taking too much credit. But I certainly had, a fairly decent sized part in the development of the Popples. I also designed all of the pocket Popples, so that was one of my assignments. So I did all of those. Super cute. Oh, I can't wait.
I don't have audio for
there they are.
Because there's a song in here that can easily get copyright stricken, so I'm not going to play audio for this. But so I'm sorry to all my audio listeners, but please, you can watch this on Spotify or YouTube if you're listening right now.
That's cute.
You completely
I've never seen that commercial before. That's darling.
I hadn't seen it.
One of the interesting things about the toy industry is that it takes a long time to develop a toy. A soft toy with a big company takes probably close to a year from concept to on the shelf. But a plastic toy can take up to a year and a half, sometimes even longer. And that's because of the manufacturing process, making the molds, the mold making and the plastic fabrication manufacturing is the single most expensive and time-consuming part of toy development. And so I was only at Mattel this first time. I was actually at Mattel twice for a year. And then I went to Hasbro. And so by the time the Popples came out, I'd moved on. And so and that happened to me a number of times in my career where by the time a toy came out, I had moved to another company. But also another thing about, when you work for a toy company, unless you're working for a small company that has very limited products, you're generally working on multiple toys at the same time. I can't ever remember a time when I was a full-time employee that I was just working on one thing. So that meant, when I was at Mattel that first year, I was working on Popples. I was working on Lady Lovely Locks. I was working on My Child. And we were doing a variety of projects at the same time. And I was really learning, Rainbow Brite. That was, I designed the last Rainbow Brite doll, who's Moonglow. And we didn't know it was going to be the last year, but there were 3, or I guess maybe there were 4, what they call dress up Rainbow Brite dolls. And Moonglow was the last one. And I designed her. So I was working on 4 lines at Mattel. And so by the time Popples came out and some of these other things came out, I'd moved on. And not only had I moved on to another company, but I'd moved on to lots of different products, different lines. Oh, look, there she is.
Yeah.
And that's interesting because the character that I did was, if you see the first, go back to the image search pictures. Okay. The one that's at the top right there, that one, that's her. The others are later renditions. There's one that Rainbow Brite was created by Hallmark. And so they created their own version of her, and she had like pinker hair, colors were darker. My concept for Moonglow was that she was as pale as the moon. That's what I always said. And so that meant all of her colors were, very, very, very pastel. And later iterations were darker and brighter. And for some reason, that just didn't suit my vision for Moonglow. But anyway, so I moved on in 1986. I moved on to Hasbro. And at that time, I was part of the Dolls group. And so among my first assignments were to work on Gem and Moondreamers and Real Baby, a line called Real Baby. And then, of course, after that, there were lots of other doll lines that I worked on. Sweetie Pop's Dolly Surprise, Lullaby Baby, My Dream Baby. I'm sorry, not My Dream Baby, My Beautiful Doll, and other lines. So Maxie was another doll line that I worked on. So that was specifically a dolls group, which meant that I was pretty much just designing dolls and toy accessories. I wasn't doing play sets or anything else, just primarily dolls.
The guest that I interviewed right before you, which I told you ahead of time, is Christy Marks, who famously was a writer for Gem, but she didn't have anything to do with the doll side. But you did, and you worked on some of the Gem dolls. And so, because I couldn't talk dolls with Christy, I want to talk some Gem dolls with you, because I feel like that's a missed opportunity if I don't do that. So I'm curious, as a designer, what specific dolls from the Gem line were some of your favorites aesthetically, regardless if you worked on them or not?
Really good question. When I arrived at Hasbro in February of 1986, Gem was just being introduced at Toy Fair for the first time. And so I was not involved in the development of the first year gem dolls. My very first, but I immediately was put on the line. My very first assignment for gem was to design a makeup head, which was never produced. But I have a drawing of it in my book. And as you know, is normally the case, you're working on a toy line a year or so ahead. So even the development for the current gem line, which was introduced in '86, had been done the year before. So now we were working on 1987, and I really kind of jumped in with both feet. I have to say that I never considered myself a fashion doll designer. When I was at Mattel, I was not in the Barbie group, never wanted to be in the Barbie group. My interest in fashion was superficial. I loved kids' fashions, but as far as teen fashions or more adult fashions, like a fashion doll, I was not necessarily skilled in that area. I didn't feel like I was really skilled in that area, but working on gem was a lot of fun. And one of the things that happened when I arrived and saw the very first gem dolls was I'm a color person. I love bright colors. I love lots of color. I love a variety of color. And I was kind of surprised that they had this rock and roll doll and the colors of some of the doll, their outfits. And they did have fantasy hair colors, but I thought, they need more color. So one of my very first assignments was to design the second year holograms. The holograms, for those who don't know about Gem, were Gem's kind of backup band. They were the good guys, and then there was another competitive band called the Misfits. And these were, there's always got to be the good guys and the bad guys. So the Misfits were the bad guys, and the holograms were the good guys. And there was a whole story, as you know from Christy. The storylines behind the animated series were very sophisticated and very they really were kind of designed for older kids, not 4-year-olds, but older kids, even up into teenagers, really enjoyed the Gem animated series. And so when I was assigned the second year holograms, my first decision was to make them as colorful as I could. I was actually given a restriction, which bothered me a little bit, but I understood. And that's that when I designed the second year holograms, I was asked to use the same, what we call silhouette, meaning the fashions had to basically be the same as the first year, but I could use whatever fabrics and colors that I wanted to. There were a couple of changes that I made, but in a way that was a restriction, but also in a way, I'm not sure how much people really were aware that these were basically the same designs as had been the first year, only wildly different colors and wildly different fabrics and textures. But to me, that was really fun. And I was involved with finishing, not starting, but finishing the design for Synergy. I created what I believe was possibly a third year Gem and Jerica, and that was through looking at old pictures and seeing. In the beginning of 1987, we moved to new design offices. And so I took pictures in my office in January of 1987, and I saw this Gem doll on my shelf. And I said, "What doll is that?" And it turned out that it was kind of a long forgotten Gem and Jerica doll that I had completely forgotten about. So a few years ago, I was invited to be a special guest at GemCon. This was in 2018. And so I created new artwork based on my old Polaroid pictures of these Gem and Jerica dolls. And, the Gem community kind of embraced me with open arms, that I was sharing new things that they had never seen. So that was kind of fun. But as far as my experience with Gem, I think the thing that there you go, the thing that I'm really known for is the llama. And that's a story I have. This is my llama. She's actually a little bit faded because I've had her for so many years, and I've had her on display for so many years. But at some point, the marketing group wanted Gem to go on tour. Yeah, that's my original rendering that I did in 1986. And she had a lot more accessories than she ended up with. But what was going to happen was Gem was going to go on tour around the world with her band. And the idea was that she would go to different places and she would receive a pet as a gift from the country that she went to. And so I did a brainstorm with some of my colleagues, and we came up with a llama. It seemed like the logical size. And so I called her Dolly Llama. Later, she was changed to Rama Llama. The name Dolly Llama was kind of tongue in cheek, and what we call like a working name. I never really expected that she would be called Dolly Llama, but that was what I called her. I called her Dolly. And so we developed that. I designed the sculpture, did the whole thing, and it was released as a premium, not as a toy that you could buy at the toy store, which was a little disappointing at first because I was so excited to see something that I had designed on shelf, as we say, in the Gem box with some amazing illustration, and it was instead released as a premium and sent out to kids in a poly bag with her little brush and her little blanket. But what ended up happening was Gem was canceled, and so the llamas were not released in huge numbers, and so they became collectible for a while. I believe they were released in Canada first, and later they became a little bit more common, but they're still pretty hard to find, and people who collect Gem often are really interested in the llama and how I developed her and what other animals we were thinking about doing, and that's a whole other story. But I'm pretty pleased with her. And the thing that was the most fun for me is the fact that she's cute, right? I mean, I was always kind of the designer that did the cute toys. And so not being a sophisticate in fashion like some of the designers that worked on Gem, I could do something that had a cute little face, and it just suited me. So she was Gem, but she was also darling.
That's so awesome. Yeah, that's the one thing that's really interesting about a lot of toy lines is that either through accident or happenstance, usually there's some toys that come from a toy line that either aren't mass produced, like Rocket firing Boba Fett, or the Wonder Brand He-Man, and of course Rama Llama. It's just items that, like, when you see them, you're like, wait, they made that? And in researching your work, like had completely forgot about Pocket Popples. I completely forgot that was a thing because I just remember the big ones. But I was like, oh yeah, Pocket Popples. So really, that's the joy of toy collecting for me, is just finding out like all the things that you kind of missed when you were a kid, maybe, and then you're like, wait, they made that for that, and like seeing the Rama Llama, I was like, that is amazing. That's so cool. And then I saw that there was a prototype of the pet koala as well. I think Barbie got a pet koala eventually, right? I think.
Yeah, the drawing that you're talking about, actually, I recreated that. I came across an old journal. Well, first of all, let me backtrack. I have kept pretty good. I think I have them here. I've kept pretty good records of my my toy adventures through planners, daytimers, that kind of thing. But I didn't start keeping a planner until 1987. And so that meant that 1985, my first year at Mattel, and 1986, my first year at Hasbro, I didn't keep a planner. But what I did do was I have notebooks that I used for meetings and meeting notes and brainstorm notes. So I have things, right? But a couple of months ago, I came across an old journal. And this journal was a personal journal. It wasn't my business journal. And it chronicled my, when I first went to Hasbro, I left California. I had 3 young children. My youngest was under a year old, and left them in California with my husband while I went out to Hasbro to start work. And then he needed to sell our house and, get things, packed up. And he came out a couple of times, and we found a house that we liked in Rhode Island. And so I kept a journal about that experience, so I would talk about, going to work and then coming home and going out to eat or going shopping or, just the different things that people do. And in the
Right.
course of rereading this journal, I came across some little notes that I had written about the projects that I was working on. I had not thought to use that notebook as a resource for any of the research that I had done to write my book or to kind of tell my story, because I have an Instagram account where I share something I designed nearly every day, 6 days a week. And so, I'm always looking for stories and old records and things. And so I found this a couple of months ago, and I discovered that I knew I had thought that we had looked at other animals, but I couldn't remember specifically. And I came across this note that before the llama, we had talked about doing a koala. And so I was really excited that I had done, that I'd done that. Of course, I had no record of it other than my notes. So I sat down and drew up what I imagined a beautiful gem pet llama pet koala would look like, with, bright pink fur and, eyeshadow and the colors of gem. And so that's just a rendering that I came up with later. There have been several things that I've kind of recreated, including that gem makeup head and the Gem and Jerica dolls that I had models of, but I didn't have any artwork for, mostly for my Instagram and for the people who follow me who are so interested. I always kind of figured, well, if I don't have the original artwork, maybe people wouldn't be interested. But people who are fans of toys tend to be, they love everything. Yes,
Yeah.
I love that. That was done later, but it was done intelligently, thinking about how would I have done a gem makeup head if I were assigned to do it, how, my sense of style and how I might have worked. And so I just did that artwork to kind of recreate what I imagine it might have looked like.
Yeah, it's so cool. I want to go back to something you mentioned about the fact that you weren't necessarily really huge into the fashion of gem per se, but when working in a toy line, there's typically like a design bible or like some design guidelines. So, and you mentioned the colors of gem. Can you talk about some of those things that are kind of like the DNA of what makes gem and some of the design principles that like really make those dolls the way that they were?
Oh, that's such a good question. The woman who was the director of the group was very, very fashionable and very into fashion. And she really guided how the doll looked. Also, something else that I might mention, and I don't know how Hasbro is structured now, or even how they were structured 10 or 20 years ago, but when I was there in the mid 80s, the toy groups, the design hard goods groups, we in the dolls group, we designed what we called the doll in the box. So that means that any outfits or accessories that came with the doll in the box, we created. There was another group that did the play sets. So the Rock and Roadster and the recording studio and all those were done by a different group that coordinated with us. And, we had colors that we liked, more neon colors and things. But the fashion assortments were done by a completely different group. In fact, they were in a different building. They had a different director, different manager. They were just a completely different group. I'm sure that they coordinated together. I wasn't privy to that because I was just a designer. I'm sure that the director of one group and the director of the other group, got together and discussed colors and fashion things. But we were so busy with what we were doing. And as I mentioned before, we were not just working on Gem. We were working on Moondreamers, and we were working on other doll lines that were Real Baby and some other toys. So we were busy designers. And I'm sure that that my boss, who was in charge of the dolls, was not getting into the nitty gritty of what was going on with the fashion assortments, which were the clothes that were sold separately in, the packages. And so I always kind of had felt like there was a disconnect between the dolls and the fashion assortments. That's just my own personal opinion. And it's interesting too, because the Gem community, which is a really wonderful community of fans who love Gem, who love the dolls, most of them really love the animated series. They were totally unaware that there was any difference in the groups and what was going on. But I kind of always felt like the outfits that came on the dolls, in my opinion, were more cohesive, in a design standpoint than the fashion assortments. But that's just my personal opinion. I mean, there were some of the fashions that I thought were awesome. There were other fashions that I kind of scratched my head. I'm not quite sure what they were thinking about when they did that one, but that's just my opinion. And not being a fashion designer, not having a fashion design background myself, that's just a personal opinion. A difference too is that I was a mom. I was not. I didn't read Vogue, and I went home from work and hung out with my elementary school age and preschool kids. And so I wasn't really a fashion maven. I did try to, look nice and dress nicely, but there were other people in the group that were very, very fashionable and, followed fashions. And the director of the group really led the way in keeping up with trendy fashions and fashions that would have been appropriate for a rock star. And I think she did a phenomenal job. You had asked me at one point what was my favorite of the Gem line, whether I worked on it or not. And my personal favorite was Glitter and Gold Gem. And I felt that doll had a different sculpt, which I loved. And I just thought everything about her was so sophisticated and so, even though it wasn't colorful, it had the glitz and the glamour and, that gold. And she had gorgeous makeup, beautiful face painting. And that really kind of turned me into a huge Gem fan. Whereas when I first saw Gem, the original Gem and Jerrica assortment, I wasn't quite as sold. But once I saw the Glitter and Gold Gem, I just thought, man, she is hot. Another thing that's really interesting is that Hasbro spent a lot of money in producing packaging art for the Gem line that was just unbelievable. The artist that they hired was an illustrator from Boston, and Sharon Nettle is her name, and she created these beautiful illustrations for the Gem packaging art. And she used life-size models and life-size fashions, not she didn't use her imagination or dolls to do her artwork. And those illustrations have really stood the test of time. They made the Gem dolls so exciting. That packaging didn't look like any other doll that was out at the time. And I just was blown away by these beautiful illustrations. And, people who love Gem love those. And so I always even though it was very expensive and possibly one of the reasons that the Gem line ended up being canceled, because of course, producing a doll line is very expensive and perhaps the sales weren't where they hoped they would be. But in my mind, it was certainly worth it to spend the money to have that gorgeous packaging, the colors. I mean, it was so different. And of course, if you watch the Toys That Made Us, you know that there was some corporate sabotage with Barbie and the Rockers, who it was kind of an open secret that they must have seen our products. We are pretty convinced that we came first and that Barbie and the Rockers, and we knew that for years and years and years, and it wasn't until it was finally admitted on the Toys That Made Us that they got wind of what we were doing and came out with their competitive line. And, that's just the nature of the game. Toy wars, toy competition is fierce. We think about toys as being fun and cute and sweet and wholesome and for kids. And of course, behind the scenes, there's a lot of cutthroat competition and intrigue going on. Not from me, of course, because I wasn't important enough to do anything like that. Plus, I wouldn't have done it. But these stories are fun to hear about. And but eventually, Gem was canceled and was replaced by another fashion doll called Maxie. And Maxie was darling. She was a younger, sweeter high school girl, very 80s with her big hair. And I was able to work on the Maxie line also and enjoyed the fashion doll work that I did. But my heart was really at the cuter, younger, smaller dolls like Dolly Surprise and like Sweetie Pops. And that was what I really enjoyed. Baby dolls, toddler dolls, what we call special feature dolls, which are dolls that do something, mini dolls, just lots and lots of dolls that I enjoyed working on.
That's awesome. So you touched on the fact that Gem was canceled, and you worked on, it is the life of a designer, and not just a toy designer, but any designer. I'm a game designer, and I've definitely worked on games that have never seen the light of day. And you have some amazing illustrations in your book about some projects that never saw the light of day, including My Little Pony, the fashion doll head from Gem, obviously, that we just touched upon, and Moondreamers Wave 2, which I know is pretty heartbreaking to design a full wave and not actually have it come out. And then also another wave of Wrestling Buddies. Of all the projects that never were, if you could wave a magic wand, since we're the land of fantasy and toys, what line would you want to see created if you can go back?
If I could go back to a line that I worked on that didn't come out and wave a magic wand, it would be Moondreamers, just without a doubt. For those who aren't familiar with Moondreamers, they also were released in 1986. And it was just a darling line of mini dolls that were from space. And they lived in a land called Starry Up. And, so there was all kinds of references to space and stars and moons and galaxies. And they had pets and things. The unique feature about Moondreamers was that their hair glowed in the dark. And they also had other parts of their outfits that glowed in the dark, maybe the little star that was on their chest, or, something, a decoration that was on their shoes or something like that. And then of course the play sets, which were designed by a different group, but coordinated really well. And so for the second year, I was asked to design all of the new Moondreamers and the 2 new Starfinders. So in the particular picture that you have up on the screen, the 4 dolls that are kind of more in the background were the new Moondreamers, and the 2 dolls in the front that are smaller with their pets were called Starfinders. So I designed, all of those dolls, those 6 dolls. I did not do the pets. A woman who worked in the My Little Pony group and who did all the pets for the original Moondreamer line did them. But not only did I design them, but I was able to create what we call their backstory. So, it wasn't just designing some toys that had, different colors or different outfits. I got to create who they were and what they did in this whole world. And of course, there was an animated series, so this would have been brought into the series had the line continued. But we had Nightingale, she was musical. She had a little musical note on her little hairpiece, and she led the kind of the cosmic symphony. There was a character called Glitzy Gleamer, and she was what we called the Vanna White of Starry Up. She was like a game show host. And there was another one, Startiste. And of course, she was the artist. So she, she created the beautiful paintings and the beautiful night sky and created all of the cosmic colors. And her outfit had lots of little paint splashes on them. And then the other one was Moondust. And she had her role of controlling the moon and the light of the moon. And she actually was a darker skinned character. So she was the first Moondreamer that was diverse, we might say. And then the two little Starfinders that I did, they were cute, just kind of cute little toddlers. And when Moondreamers was canceled, it was very shocking to us, to me in particular. You get used to lines being canceled. Gem was just heartbreaking to see Gem canceled. But I was a little bit more invested in Moondreamers because of, first of all, I had so much design input into the main dolls, which was really wonderful. But they were cute. They were super cute, and they were just right up my alley. The kind of doll that would be my dream to do. Small dolls, super cute, little stories, detailed outfits, just all of the stuff that I love to do was what Moondreamers were. So wish I had that magic wand. And, people have asked me, there are a lot of Moondreamers fans out there, and people have asked me, why don't you see if you can't get Moondreamers relaunched, or why doesn't somebody redo it? Why doesn't Hasbro redo it? Relaunching lines is such a difficult business.
Yeah,
and
it's not a trivial ask at all.
Not right. And it's been done, not with Moondreamers, but it's been done with other lines. There have been several iterations of Strawberry Shortcake, several iterations of Rainbow Brite, and other doll lines that were popular with girls. And I've actually worked on multiple iterations of the same doll, like Cupcakes. I worked on the original Cupcakes at Tonka, and then I worked on the Radica cupcake dolls that were released in the early 2000s, and designed the dolls for that. So, it often doesn't work. Right now we're on Care Bears number 3 or 4. They're cute.
Right.
Popples has been re-released. Trolls, of course, is a line that seems to never end. The original, I played with Trolls when I was, when I was in elementary school back in the 60s. And then later in the 90s, I designed Trolls for the original San Francisco toy makers. So, but it's really hard. There haven't been a lot of successes, long-term successes, with relaunching toy lines that had a popularity at a certain time. When I went back to Mattel in the mid 90s, and that's kind of a convoluted story about how I had been working for Fisher Price. Mattel bought Fisher Price, and so they basically transferred me back to Mattel. I was able to keep my seniority from Fisher Price. Mostly it was because I had been heading up the dolls development group at Fisher Price. And when Mattel bought Fisher Price, they basically felt that they would end a Fisher Price doll program. And so they didn't need me there. They needed me back in LA to work at Mattel. So I went back to Mattel, and one of the things that we tried to do was to relaunch Chatty Cathy. Chatty Cathy had been a popular doll when I was a child. She was released by Mattel in 1960. And, people loved Chatty Cathy. You pulled the magic ring on her back and she said a number of phrases, and she had this cute little belly and this cute little buck tooth look. And she was extremely popular. So in the mid 90s, part of my team at Mattel, first of all, we did reproduction Chatties. Reproduction dolls were really popular back in the 80s and 90s. And so we thought we would re-release. So we did the original, the two most popular outfits that Chatty wore, the two most popular looks, the brunette and the blonde and the blue dress and the red dress. And so I was involved in that. And then I left Mattel at the end of 1997, and I continued to freelance for Mattel for many, many years. And I did a lot of Chatty Cathy work. They released those original dolls, and then they released a holiday doll. And then they decided to try to blow out Chatty and put her in all kinds of 60s fashions. And, I designed all kinds of cute little Chatties that were in, little psychedelic outfits or clothes that children might have worn in the early 60s. It was super fun for me because that was my era. And so I would dress Chatty Cathy in a fashion that I would have worn, in the early 60s. And so, but it didn't do well. Chatty Cat, the original line became, was fairly popular with people who were collectors. But by the time, it was released, moms who were buying dolls for their daughters, they were too young to have known about Chatty Cathy. And you have to kind of capitalize on the nostalgia factor of a doll line. And so that nostalgia factor doesn't always translate into sales with children. It may translate with sales with adult collectors like Gem. Gem later was released a number of years ago by Integrity Toys, who went in and got the license from Hasbro and were able to release a whole line of beautiful, intricate fashion dolls, but they were designed for adult collectors. They were not designed for kids. And I'm a children's designer. I'm a lot more invested in the world of kids and kids play than I am in the world of collectors and adult fans. Even though I adore the adult fans, that's not necessarily my world. I love the kids. So I'm interested in toy lines that can translate to popularity and desirability of kids. And some of those older lines just don't make it, which is sad, isn't it? Because there's so many wonderful lines.
Yeah. I mean, it's an important point to make that you don't necessarily want to force the toys of your youth on your own children per se. That I've interviewed a couple people that Jay from Geek Dad Life. His kids play with like Minecraft toys, and there's other people that their kids play with like Ben 10 or whatever else. Of course, Bratz is a whole thing too. Obviously, in your book, you have an anecdote about how Bratz changed everything, which I think is really important to talk about for people that don't know about the doll world. But the toy industry in general has taken a lot of big changes, especially just in the past 10 years, especially with the closure of Toys R Us. And the toy market looks very different in the 2020s because of the pandemic. So I'm curious, what's your take on the toy industry as it kind of stands today, both as a designer, as a mom, as a just all the above? What are your thoughts on the toy industry as it stands today?
It's kind of a complicated question. I do follow closely the industry. I subscribe to a number of toy industry newsletters, magazine, publications and things like that. I really try to stay on top of the industry as an industry. But it has changed a lot, and in some ways, really in good ways. I mean, actually, the toy industry is healthy, is thriving, and a lot of it because of the pandemic. People were buying toys. They were buying them online. It didn't matter where they bought them from. And the toy companies, although a huge number of them were working remotely, and I'm not sure how they got their work done, but somehow they managed to get the lines released, has fulfilled and continues to fulfill the demand for toys. And I also, in my area, I have become really kind of enraptured by a lot of independent toy stores that have cropped up here once Toys R Us closed down. And so when I go look at toys to see what's going on, I don't go to Walmart. I don't go to Target. I go to some of these, I call them independent toy stores. They're not what we call the mass market. They're more educational kinds of toys. But boy, they've stepped up, a lot of them. And I don't know if it's universal. I only know what's in my area. But there are a lot of wonderful products out there for kids that are being developed and are being and are what I consider, educational, wholesome, fun, clever, and I love them. I think what's going on in the mainstream toy industry is a little bit not to my personal preference. And I have to, that's always tricky because I follow a lot of people on social media who are collectors and who are fans. A lot of them are fans of toys that I designed or the era. They love Strawberry Shortcake, or they love Care Bears or Wrestling Buddies, or whatever it is that they love. It's a nostalgia thing. And then there's a large group of people that I'm aware of who collect and follow some of the more current toy lines. And so I, of course, see these toys. I go to the toy store. I have grandchildren. I buy them toys.
The best part about having
me,
grandchildren, of course.
It is, of course. And our grandkids love getting stuff from me. They love coming over here and playing in my studio. I have a lot of stuff over here I let them play with. I have a few things I don't let them touch. But anyway, I digress. I think for me personally, and I do ask a lot of people, I occasionally ask open-ended questions on my Instagram to get people's opinions. But there are trends, especially with girls' toys and dolls, that I struggle with. And a lot of it has to do with how many years of blind box toys have we had, which is, of course, is a collectible issue, right? So a blind box is what we call, or blind bag, the toys that you don't know what you're getting. You go
Right.
and you find the little pod with the LOL surprise, and you open it up and you find out it's this one. I think it pretty much started with Shopkins and has moved on to so many doll and toy lines, particularly girls' toys. I don't think you see it quite as much in traditional boys' toys. And of course, the gender issues is also another, hot button issue. And I'm not going to get into that. But when I talk about traditional girls' toys, I certainly am not implying that boys don't play with them and girls don't play with boys' toys. I mean, I love it. Kids can play and should play with whatever they enjoy. But it's just easier for me from a category to talk about girls' toys or dolls. And so,
Sure.
in my opinion, with the blind box trend, is the play value is limited. In other words, the play pattern is to collect them, not to do cool stuff with them when you get them. And
Right.
so, and I'm not saying that doesn't exist. I'm sure if I explored further, I would see that. But when you look at Moondreamers, for example, and that entire world and the play sets and the galaxy and the good guys and the bad guys and the role play and the things that you do, you don't see that so much. I mean, granted, we have Rainbow High, we have dolls, fashion dolls that have got, a lot of character development, but I think there's something missing, and I can't really put my finger on it to say it's worse or it's not as good. I think it's great, but I think there's something missing that was there in those toys of the 80s and the 90s. And in my opinion, a lot of what happened, and that's why I say Bratz changed everything, is that innocence is gone. In about 2000 or 1999 or 2000, I started freelancing for MGA, the company that created Bratz. And even though I wasn't involved with Bratz per se, I was working for the company and was kind of watching with great interest. One of my very dearest friends did all of the original fashions for Bratz for the first 5 years or so that Bratz came, and I did a little bit of work for her, and was kind of aware. Plus, at that time, I had a daughter who was about that age. She was 8 or so years old when Bratz came out, and I remember getting them for. I didn't have any real objection from like a lot of moms did, that Bratz were just over the top. I lived through that whole Barbie thing. That was what Barbie was considered at first, way too sophisticated. And I kind of think kids should just play with what they enjoy playing with. But that sophistication and I don't know, I think it kind of spilled over into so many toy lines. And so it was really hard then to create a toy line that had a large backstory and a large, play pattern, like, say, Rainbow Brite or, Care Bears or something like that. And so then eventually, as time went on, every toy company wanted to compete with Bratz. And so I was designing dolls and characters and pets and things for other companies where they wanted that edgy, the big eyes and the kind of sultry looks and things like that. And I did a lot of that kind of stuff, but I longed to kind of go back to the days of doing the cute little sweet faces. And of course I did a lot of products like that in the next 20 years or so. But I do think Bratz marked a kind of a sea change in the toy industry and the doll industry that is still reverberating today. But the blind box toys, like anything, it will come and go. We'll see.
Right.
They will come out of fashion and something else will come in. I just hope that the toys that come in can help kids to stay young, to stay innocent, to stay sweet, to stay imaginative. And, I do love the idea of educational toys. I do love, crafts and activity toys. My granddaughters love those kind of toys. They're both 9, and they love the kind of toys where they can do a project. And I love to encourage creativity. But as I get older and as even though I'm still designing toys, I'm probably at less demand today to do those kinds of dolls, because that's not my jam. That's not my style. And I have done, in the last 5 years or so, I have designed some dolls that were, kind of a little bit more edgy or more stylized. We'll just call them more stylized. But
Sure.
I found myself designing more and more baby dolls, for example, or preschool toys, things that are younger. And that suits me fine. I don't want to have to try to put myself into a square hole. If I am at a point in my career where I still want to design, but I don't want to have to force myself to do something that I'm not as crazy about. I maybe, I don't know whether it's that I'm picking and choosing, or whether people know the stuff that I do. And so they hire me based on what they know of my background and what I like to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. You hit on a really important point as well, as far as like children's creativity and what toys can do for them in terms of like fostering creativity. I think that's a super important point to make, is that like toys are such a wonderful tool to foster creativity among kids. When I was a kid, some of my most vivid memories, I'm a game designer, and I could say that I was designing encounters or things by having Batman on top of the Ghostbusters firehouse and with the Ninja Turtles and everything else, and mixing and matching encounters and stuff like that. But like giving time for kids to like let their imagination run wild or interact with a craft of some sort, I think is super important, because we're in the time and era of screenagers, of kids that just always want to be on the phone no matter what, and having time to be bored but not be bored, but be entertained in different forms of media is super important, I think. So thank you for hitting on that point.
Right. Yeah, I can't emphasize that enough. I mean, as a child myself, I was not
Wait, you were a
really,
child? Me too. Sorry.
yeah, well, it was a while ago. I wasn't really a toy person, which is kind of ironic that I ended up being a toy designer. I was really, tomboyish. My favorite thing to do would be hopping on my bike, riding. In those days, you could just kind of go do whatever you wanted to do as long as you got home before dark. And I was athletic. I wanted to run and jump and climb trees and ride my bike and ride my skateboard. And I played board games with my best friend, but I really rarely, I had a few dolls, but I really rarely played that way. But I was an artist. And so my very favorite thing to do was to draw. And I had this kind of personal philosophy that everything I drew had to come from my imagination. And later on I grew to understand that that's important. It's also important to discipline yourself and learn to draw based on reality so that you can really develop yourself as an artist. I mean, I studied art. I got my degree in art, so I've taken a lot of painting and drawing and perspective. And I mean, I have the foundation of an artist. And but those years where I drew from my imagination, that was kind of my life. And I do have some talented grandkids who are artists, and when it comes time for gift giving, it's almost always art supplies, for them. My granddaughter that just turned 9, I got her a great set of, or an instructional book, actually, drawing some simple. And I went through a lot of drawing books to help teach her how to draw different things. And I didn't like it because they were too specific, like too much manga, anime kinds of styles. I wanted, her to learn to draw a horse, in kind of the right proportions. And I'm not there to teach her. She lives in Texas. So, I found just the right, spent a lot of time just finding just the right thing. And I'm happy to say that she, I get videos from her dad with her drawing and working from her little book and learning her skills. And so, I really think it's important to encourage creativity, encourage imaginative play. And I'm not saying that today's toys aren't that way, because they probably are. But I think that Lego, for example, is probably the greatest toy line ever invented. Now, of course, you can buy Lego sets that are super, super specific, but you can also buy Lego sets that are completely open-ended. And a line that's been around as long as Lego, that involves so much creative play. That's why it's so popular. Not just because it's got the cute minifigs, it's popular because kids of all ages can explore their creativity and build. And, that's a universal play pattern building. And I suppose that's why Barbie stayed popular all these years too, because she's been so flexible. She can be anything, she can be whatever you want her to be. And that's, as a parent, a grandparent, or a creative, what you want to encourage in kids is, for them to play with toys that can encourage them to be whatever they want to be. And so I'm just going to keep designing toys till I drop. I just, I love it. I love kids. And, I love the toy industry. It's been great for me.
That's so awesome. Stefanie, thank you so much for sharing all your amazing work today and talking about your inspiration and all the awesome things you worked on. I obviously could talk to you for another 2 hours. Just on any individual line that you worked on, because your portfolio is just so incredible. And please go buy Stefanie's book, Toy Stories, which is fantastic. And I guess since we're talking about it, is there anything that you'd like to plug before we take off?
Sure. You can order my book on my website, and I'm sure Nick will put it on his comments, it's Stefanie Eskander Design.com. And you can order prints. You can order my book. My Instagram is called Steph Designs Toys. So at STEF Designs Toys. And again, I post something 6 days a week that I designed. And not only do I post my designs, but I generally tell stories, give a little fill in, a little background. And I try to, mix it up with things that are recent and things that are 30 years old, and, do a variety. So I really enjoy having people interact with me on my Instagram. So those are the two things that I'd like to plug. Thanks.
Cool. I'll make sure that's in the description of the video. Stefanie, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you.
Thanks. It's really great to meet you, Nick. And thanks for being, such a good host and such a good questioner. Your questions were awesome. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I might have you back on because there's a lot of stuff I still want to talk to you about. So I might do a part 2 with you eventually if you'd be interested.
Awesome.
But
I would love to.
Thank you so much for your time. It's been fantastic.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity. I was just gonna say I could talk forever. I do talk a lot. So
maybe there'll be a part 2 in the future.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick.
Everybody else, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.